Okay, so today I'll be recording a reaction video on the debate between Sean Carroll and Eric Weinstein, hosted by Piers Morgan. Show you. Okay, so let's start.
What is your main bone of contention with Eric Weinstein?
You should probably ask Eric that.
Sean has been nothing but civil. He's also extremely nasty. But let me say a bunch of things to Dr. Carroll. Dr. Carroll, I'd like to hear your explanation for 3 generations of flavor chiral fermions with the observed quantum numbers under the group SU3 plus SU2 plus SU1.
I have read Eric's paper. Here it is. I actually have it here. It's worse than you would think.
How dare you?
How dare you read your paper?
I highly advise you to spend more time in your physics department and less time on YouTube.
So we're not allowed to think about Eric's theory and write a follow-up paper about it.
Oh no, you're very much allowed, Sean.
I have my disagreements with string theorists, my agreements with them, but I respect it, and I think that they're trying their best.
The first rule of Physics Fight Club is don't talk about the problems with Physics Fight Club.
I have found myself in the awkward and unenviable position of defending the establishment heterodoxy.
Your intellectually insulting aspect reminds me of you as the Marie Antoinette of theoretical physics influencer.
Given I've only understood about 1/10 of what either of you has said for the last hour, I would like to end on a point where none of us know the answer to something. For centuries, scientists have grappled with the most fundamental question of them all. What is reality? Well, up until the 20th century, it was considered to be a matter of common sense. We lived in a material and objective reality, perhaps created by God, but one that could be accurately measured and predicted. And then came Einstein, who revolutionized everything by saying that things were a lot more relative than all that. Space could bend time. Mysterious black holes existed. The universe was expanding. But even Albert Einstein failed to truly grapple with what came next, the wild world of quantum physics, where nothing plays by the rules, even Einstein's, and things seem to exist in 2 places at once. Today, the biggest brains on the planet are at loggerheads over what this all means and where science goes next. Are there multiple universes? Do we live in a matrix-style simulation? Could there be an intelligent designer? For this special uncensored debate, I'm joined by 2 scientists with very different answers to the very big question. Sean Carroll is Professor of Physics and Philosophy at Johns Hopkins University. He hosts his own podcast, Mindscape, and draws audiences of millions elsewhere. Dr. Eric Weinstein is a Harvard-educated mathematician. His appearances on the Joe Rogan show alone have been viewed 26 million times, and is a regular guest on Uncensored. And despite both being scientific podcasting rock stars, Dr. Weinstein and Professor Carroll have never actually appeared together until now. So welcome to you, gentlemen, and thank you for agreeing to lock horns. I have to say, very intelligent horns. Dr. Carroll, let me ask you first of all this. Are we actually here?
I think so. I'm here. I don't know about anybody else. It could be a solipsistic kind of thing, but yeah, I think that there's a lot of things that you can imagine meaning when you say things exist, things are real, etc. And I think that if you don't include you and me in tables and chairs, etc., I don't think that you're on the right track in defining what it means to exist. So yes, we're here.
What is your main bone of contention with Eric Weinstein?
Yeah, so basically, if theoretical physics is hard to understand, does it mean it has to be woke?
You should probably ask Eric that. I mean, I'm a working physicist. I am a professor in a physics department. I write physics papers. I have found myself in the awkward and unenviable position of defending the establishment heterodoxy. Like, it's never what I imagined I would be doing, but there's good reasons why the heterodoxy is the heterodoxy. So I think that academic physics, even though I'm happy to disagree with certain choices they make about what to work on and what emphasis to put on there, is working in good faith. I think that we're trying our best to understand the universe at a deep level. String theory, which we'll talk about in the program, is one example of this. I have my disagreements with string theorists, my agreements with them, but I respect it, and I think that they're trying their best. And if someone else comes up with a better idea, they'll move what they're doing and focus on that idea. It just hasn't happened yet.
for those with smaller brain power than you, what is string theory?
That's a great question. And in fact, very famous string theorist Joe Polchinski wrote a very influential paper called What is String Theory? Decades after string theory started being a popular theory to think about. And the fact is we still don't know yet. It's an approach. You start with a very simple idea that instead of the universe being made of particle-like things at the fundamental level, like the electron being a point-like particle, the photon, etc., which we all knew wasn't exactly right anyway, but we can talk about that later, replace that with a little loop of vibrating string. Now, why would you do that? There's a prehistory that goes into features of the strong interactions that motivated people to do it. They looked at this idea, what if the world were made of little loops of string rather than point particles? Problematically, the theory kept failing at what they were trying to do with it, which is explain the strong nuclear force, because it kept predicting the existence of gravity. So eventually, people said, well, wait a minute, gravity exists. Maybe this is a theory of gravity as well. And after many, many years of hard work on the part of people who were otherwise ignored by the community, they showed that it's actually a very successful theory of gravity and possibly everything else. You have to buy a lot of extra stuff, like extra dimensions of space-time that we don't see and so forth, what is called the holographic principle, which again, we could get into if you want to.
No, originally didn't have a holographic principle. They were trying to use compactifications of these additional dimensions in some Calabi-Yau manifolds, and in which they hypothesized to be very, very small, so invisible. And the holographic principle came later, a slightly different approach.
But the theory keeps moving forward while at the same time utterly failing to connect directly with experiments. So this has caused, a lot of hair pulling among the physics community. The theory looks very promising, but we haven't actually been able to put it to work to connect to the real world.
Well, yeah, I think for me it's more like already just a certain quasi-mathematical framework where you could just work with different notions and connect it to some rigorous math. More like it's more like a math question for me now. I don't know whether we could still find some applications of string theory in the real world. Maybe it's possible, but it requires very high energy.
Okay, Eric Weinstein, your response to that?
Well, first of all, I just assume that I'm being simulated by Sean Carroll. So who knows what's real? More or less, whether we're in a simulation or whether we're in not a simulation.
It's a really good question. Before you get into your response, we don't actually know, do we? I have sometimes the most extraordinarily vivid deja vu dreams, or I dream stuff and then it seems to happen or whatever, and it always makes me sit there shaking and trembling and sweating and thinking, are we all just living in some weird simulation? How would we know?
Well, maybe we should never legalize cannabis then. I don't know. The situation is that I think that Sean and I probably agree almost completely on everything until 1972. Then you have the first really serious situation where a mysterious term is not only introduced into our common vocabulary called quantum gravity, but it takes over as a fictitious history that the central problem of theoretical physics is the quantization of gravity, which is not true historically. You can check it on Google Ngrams. This is just a fiction. The progress in the object that tracks our progress in physics, called the Lagrangian or the action, stops moving in 1973. And there's a bunch of wiggle words that I don't think we have time for between fundamental physics and regular physics. But then my guess is that the first problem that Sean and I will find ourselves at loggerheads over is that I think that making quantum gravity the holy grail of theoretical physics, which is repeated and perseverated ad nauseum, is a terrible crime.
Yeah, I don't know what he means by it stopped moving forward. well, if you already build standard model of particle physics, which is something which we could measure on collider, and it just keeps working, it's not clear what does it mean to move it forward. Maybe we should move our energy scale in our experiment forward first to get to the places where standard model will stop working. But conceptually, moving on higher and higher energy scales away from standard model would mean we have to integrate gravity into it, right? At some Planck scale, some Planck's energy level, and that's why physicists probably decided it's natural, right? It's if we are going to have like a universal theory of everything at very, very high energy scales, it has to include gravity. And well, practically it only probably works in the middle of black holes and at the first several seconds, even I don't know, microseconds during the Big Bang. It's just hard to understand what does it mean. What does it mean that this project stopped moving? What we can verify was verified, and not clear what the guidance should be to go beyond that. One guidance is dark matter, and there are people working on that, not very successfully because not very clear how to connect the model to experimental observations very well, how to rule out non-working theories. But I don't know what he meant.
And what is quantum
Second
gravity?
big problem.
Again, for those who are not as au fait with this as you guys, what is quantum
If
gravity?
I may, so there's a standard story that you'll hear, more or less. Sean is a part of a group of about 5 people who do most of the communication of theoretical physics to the American public. In the UK, there are different ones. And there's certain tropes that are repeated and you don't hear anything else. So the trope that sounds something like this: we have 2 theories that are bedrock reality. We have one called the Standard Model, which covers 3 out of 4 forces, the non-gravitational ones, and all of the matter that we see in the universe, as well as something called the Higgs field and maybe some other fields as well. In the other theory, we have Einstein's theory of gravity, which was put into relatively final form before 1920, maybe by 1917. And then the claim is that the incompatibility between the 2 of them is that one of them is a quantum theory, that is the Standard Model of the nuclear forces, electromagnetism, is a quantum theory, whereas Einstein's gravitational theory, general relativity, has resisted quantization. And then, as the trope goes, that incompatibility must be resolved by forcing the children of Einstein to submit to the will of the children of Bohr. And that explanation, to me, is patently absurd. There's an incompatibility in the classical version of the Standard Model before you get to the quantum version of the Standard Model, which is that one of them is a so-called gauge theory, and the other theory cannot be gauged.
Yeah, I don't know what he means by it. So the Standard Model is a gauge theory because it has gauge field in it, right? The photons, W plus, W minus, and Z bosons, and gluons, right? It's a special way to describe interactions, right? All interactions in our world happen through this. They're mediated through this auxiliary particle, right? Interaction carriers, these vector bosons. But I don't understand what he means by words that gravity could not be gauged. In some sense, you could say that gravity is a gauge theory where the gauge group is diffeomorphism groups, diffeomorphism group of our space-time. Of course, not exactly the same Young-Mills theory. It's indeed unique, but it still has what you would call gauge symmetry. And I guess the most important comment to make here is that gauge symmetries are not really actual symmetries. They are more like redundancies of our description of these theories. When we calculating the path integral, to find the actual amplitudes which would measure, we are integrating over the equivalence classes with respect to the symmetries. So it's wrong to say that one theory is like a gauge theory and other theory is not a gauge theory, and it's something fundamental. No, it's more like a false dichotomy. For example, in 2 plus 1 dimensions, in 2 plus 1 dimensional space-time, photon could be described by both a vector field with gauge symmetry, gauge vector field, and a compact scalar field. There's just an exact duality between them. You could get rid of this redundancy. So this problem is rather artificial. Well, it's very confusing what he means by it.
Successfully, at least.
And
so
why
far.
does it matter so much?
Then what?
Tax day has passed, but for millions of...
Why does it matter?
Well, the tax there.
Yeah.
Well, it depends what you're trying to do. I mean, I can tell you why the lead tweet in my Twitter feed is assume a traversable cosmos. If Einstein is left in force, my claim is that there are only 2 rocks that Elon's chemical rockets can get us to, and that we have allowed ourselves to fall into the misunderstanding of Einstein's theory as the map of gravity rather than the territory of where we actually live. I don't think we live in space-time at all. And Piers, I just need to get to one further thing, which is that the really significant problem, I would say I am the only person in Generation X to have actually been present in the room when everything shifted towards string theory, which happened in 1983 at the University of Pennsylvania, when a fellow named Edward Witten gave the first lecture that I think he ever did publicly on string theory. And his will and his mind were so powerful, and his influence so completely commanding, that the entire sociology of the field turned on a dime in 83 and 84. And as such, I think I'm essentially the only person in Generation X who saw the old culture of physics become the new culture of physics. And what I claim is that Sean and I probably aren't that divided even on the mathematics of string theory. Where we are bitterly divided is that I believe that Sean thinks that the system works pretty well. I would say he's part of the 2 cheers for the institutions, meaning that he has a to be sure paragraph saying that the institutions undoubtedly have their problems and he wish things could be done better. Whereas I see an absolute collapse in the ethics, efficacy, productivity of this at our deepest levels. And if you're thinking about dark energy, dark matter, dark chemistry, all of the things that physics has done, essentially our modern world has been built by physicists, even molecular biology and the internet.
What is dark chemistry? I don't even know.
Come out of physicists and CERN respectively. With the World Wide Web. So if you think about the impact of physics, more or less the story of physics is the story of the world economy in the modern era. And we will be trapped here almost certainly unless you go in for science fiction tropes, where we will not be able to get out of the solar system, and the moon and the Mars will be our only diversification, giving the lie to Elon's claim that he's going to save humanity by making us multiplanetary. The only real diversification exists as if we shed the one atmosphere we share here and travel the cosmos.
Okay, so my takeaway from that, and was brilliantly articulated, Sean, is that basically you are going to be responsible for the end of civilization as we know it.
Apparently, yeah, I didn't know, but now the weight is bearing down on my shoulders. Look, the story Eric just told is a kind of wacky and wildly misleading history of physics in the last 50 or 60 years. The idea of quantum gravity is a very natural one because the world runs by the rules of quantum mechanics, as far as we know. This is the International Year of Quantum because it's the 100th anniversary of really figuring out how quantum mechanics works. And the thing about quantum mechanics is it's not a theory by itself. It's a framework in which you can do theories, in contrast with classical mechanics from Isaac Newton that came before it. And gravity, our best current theory of gravity from Einstein, the theory of general relativity, is a thoroughgoingly classical theory. Certainly, the default expectation is that someday we will better understand gravity at the quantum level. You don't have to think that, because you don't have to think anything. You're welcome to come up with better theories. But again, that's the default expectation. If you have a different point of view, there's a certain burden of proof to convince people that it's interesting to contemplate this other point of view. The idea of actually doing the detailed calculations to quantize gravity goes back to at least the 1950s, but it instantly hit roadblocks, and physicists were smart enough to know that it wasn't working the way they wanted it to. The very simple thing you do, if I can get just a little bit detailed for a second here, because people never hear this, and I think it's really, really important to understand why string theory is so popular. If you want to invent a new quantum mechanical theory of the world, the first thing you do is you ask yourself, if I have two particles and they come together and scatter, there's a probability that different things will happen. I'm going to make photons, I'm going to make electrons and positrons or whatever, and you calculate that probability. And the famous triumph of mid-20th century physics was to show that you can do that and get a finite answer. If you're sloppy about it, your answer turns out to be infinity and your theory is on the wrong track. Everything that we know about in the physical world has a nice finite answer in this quantum mechanical realm, except for gravity. Gravity doesn't fit. And indeed, it was recognized pretty quickly that there was a good reason why gravity doesn't fit, and it was almost impossible to imagine fitting gravity in, namely that gravity interacts with everything. Gravity interacts with photons, with electrons, with quarks, with whatever. And so when you do this scattering experiment, you do the calculation, everything in the universe contributes to the infinitely big answer that you don't want to get. Apparently, what you would need is some kind of miraculous cancellation between all the different contributions from all the different fields. And people looked at that and said, we have no idea how to make that happen. Let's not worry about quantum gravity. And then string theory comes along. And again, it wasn't even trying to be a theory of gravity, but when they do this calculation, the miraculous cancellation happens in string theory. You get a finite answer to what happens when you scatter different particles off of each other. That is right now the only theory in which that miraculous happening actually works. And this was finally put together as a sort of sensible, viable theory in the mid-1980s. And it was a calculation by John Schwartz and Michael Green that showed that the theory did not have what are called anomalies. And you can look up the magazines at the time. Physics Today ran an article saying, anomaly cancellation launches superstring bandwagon. The point is, the reason why I had to go into those details is, many physicists instantly became interested in string theory and quantum gravity who were not before. But the reason they did is not because Ed Witten is a smart guy and he towers over the field. It's because there was a calculation that showed the theory is promising. Physicists are not sheep. If Ed Witten had said we should all work on this, but everyone else looked at it and thought it wasn't very promising, he would have been ignored. But since then, there's no competitor to string theory that has had that miraculous feature that string theory has.
And just before I go to Eric to respond to that,
yeah, actually, I've never even done this calculation myself with scattering of gravitons, but from what I've heard, indeed, people find out that in order to cancel the divergences, you have to introduce infinite number of new fields, infinite number of new particles, anyway, and that's looks kind of arbitrary, right? It's like, what do you mean? Oh, why do we need all those particles? Where does it come from? We don't see them, right? So people kind of give up on it, right? And in string theory, actually, we have them automatically, right? Because if you look at the string from a very, very big distance, you will not see that it's a string. You will see as a point-like object, right? It's a look like a particle. But depending on which mode of a string is excited, it will look like a different particle. It will have different mass, it will have different spin. So in total, in the low energy limit, right, if you're looking from far away, string theory will look like a quantum field theory with infinite number of particles. And yeah, as he said, it turns out that precisely this infinite number of particles which string theory adds is the one which was needed to cancel the divergences in the graviton scattering amplitudes.
Your belief is that as a result of all this, it is more likely than not that there's a multiverse. There are many other worlds. I'm not misrepresenting.
No, it's like a different thing. He's confusing like a multi-universe interpretation of quantum mechanics with like additional dimensions in string theory. Like it's different things.
Well, you're saying true things for the wrong reasons. It's what philosophers call a Gettier problem. I'm a believer in the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. That's a question about the foundations of quantum mechanics, which again goes back to the 1950s. But that is more or less separate from the question of which model within the world of quantum mechanics is the right one. Is it field theory? Is it string theory? Is it loop quantum gravity? Is it something else? So I do believe that the best understanding of quantum mechanics we have right now implies the existence of parallel universes. Again, that could be true, and if we have a better theory that comes along, I'm happy to change my mind. There's also a separate idea of the multiverse that comes with combining string theory with inflationary cosmology, a scenario of what happened very close to the Big Bang. So those are two different ideas about the multiverse. Many worlds of quantum mechanics says literally every time I make a quantum measurement, now there's two worlds in which different measurement outcomes were obtained. The string theory multiverse says very, very, very far away in cosmological distance, there's a patch of space where conditions look remarkably different than they do here.
If you're struggling with sleepless nights and exhausting days, you might... Your response?
Yeah, I just got completely misportrayed, and this is actually, I'm glad that this is happening, because this is sort of what happens when you tangle with the group of people who are supportive of this program. I did not say what I think Sean is choosing to either infer incorrectly or imply, that somehow the world is not quantum mechanical or quantum field theoretic, and that somehow gravity is given a hall pass to go home and enjoy relaxation where everyone else has to work hard. And what I said was that the idea of forcing gravity to submit to the same quantization procedures that have been successfully applied to other forces and to matter has not worked. It has stagnated the field, and that quantum harmonization is far more important. You could also decide to geometrize the quantum rather than quantize gravity and thus quantize the geometry. So because Sean's framework precludes somebody saying something outside the framework, the inference is that someone ignorantly just said that gravity can be kept out of the quantum framework, which I absolutely don't say. You'll also notice that Sean did not choose to take issue with the fact that one of these is a gauge theory and another one isn't a gauge theory, and so that there is a...
Yeah, I don't know why he's insisting on this. I already commented on that. It's kind of strange. Yeah, I guess you have to go into the width of his theory to understand what it
problem with gauging gravity and what that means, and the fact that we're getting no actual progress in the harmonization of gravity with the quantum that can give us a green light and tell us where we're going. Like, I would happily cede to Sean all sorts of things, like the string theorists are by far the smarter group of all people trying to go beyond the standard model in general relativity. I would further see that if the task is to quantize gravity directly, the string theorists and the string theory program have been more successful. But what you just saw is an example of what is actually going catastrophically wrong in the field, that a dominant narrative that has been perseverated into an as-if reality has created two teams, a smart team that gets it and a dumb team that just doesn't. And that kind of toxic sociology is the true problem. And my guess is that that will recur multiple times during this thing, is that I will not be heard, and that Sean will continue to have a version of Eric that lives in his head, which shares my name, but not my understanding nor my beliefs.
And that is, of course, if we get past the hurdle of whether we're all here at all. Now, Eric, you've come up with an alternative theory of everything. It's based around geometric unity, and my understanding is it's a proposed framework. aiming to unify the fundamental forces of nature, including gravity and quantum mechanics, within a single geometric structure, introducing a 14-dimensional manifold that extends space-time and embeds known particles and forces into a larger mathematical context. And the observation we had here in the research is that while ambitious, the theory remains largely unpublished in peer-reviewed literature, has not yet been formally tested or widely accepted by the physics community. Now, because you're so smart about this stuff, your geometric unity paper is 69 pages long, extremely complex, way over my head. So we did what everyone in my position does these days. We went onto YouTube and saw if we could find anybody who'd analysed it and had a conclusion. And we found this.
Thank you to Eric Weinstein. It's an avant-garde and creative theory. Kurt here, several months later. This has been so long in the making. Geez, you have no idea. Anyhow, I wanted to say that I mean what I just said. I may have said this before in the iceberg, and if I haven't, I should have because it bears repeating. I haven't seen a theory like this come from any single individual ever. Not one that's this fleshed out or has this amount of unexampled connections within itself, as well as to what's known as the theoretical physics backbone that we talked about earlier.
Now, Eric, there's lots of people doing stuff like that about it. Why do you think that the mainstream physics world is not taking this seriously enough?
Well, first of all, I disagree. You see, part of what's going on is that Sean is part of a group of physics influencers who are constantly spreading misinformation, which leads to a climate of fear. I, for example, found the following quote of Sean. What I really, really want to get across to the audience is that nobody in physics departments is discussing this with other people in physics departments. Now, I don't happen to be coming to you from the physics department at the moment, but I happen to be on a 5-day visit to a leading physics department. And in this situation, I just had a 9-hour conversation and talk with 3 hours or 4 hours rather of that being an explication of geometric unity. What Sean is doing constantly is attempting to say, look, let's do some pattern matching. We have a man generously in midlife. He's not trained in the subject. He doesn't appear to accept the quantum gravity program. He appears to be possessed of the idea that a single individual, Ed Witten, caused all sorts of people who aren't sheep to cohere into a single framework that has been perseverated and doesn't seem to produce fruit. He has a telling of the tale that is, first of all, just not courageous. It's at odds with reality. From my experiences in this physics department, what I can tell you is that we have a situation in which everybody sees the problems. And so when Sean does a 4-hour podcast, which I think maybe 3 hours I'd recommend to anybody because Sean is one of the best explainers and also extremely good at mathematics and keeping true to actual physics in terms of his understanding. He then goes into this thing that there is no crisis in theoretical physics. And as one of my physics colleagues said last night, the first rule of Physics Fight Club is don't talk about the problems with Physics Fight Club. There's a self-evident crisis. I can show it to you numerically. Somehow, the idea is that a small number of people who are either at the top of the physics influencer pile, which is where I would put Sean, or at the top of the prestige pile in research, have held a view that is completely at odds with reality, whose key feature is the exclusion of different perspectives. So when, for example, I can tell, I probably can guess the AI, Piers, from which you got the analysis of geometric unity. What you see is a very strange situation where a group of people go around attempting to throw shade on anyone who questions whether there's a massive problem in physics that everybody who's actually in the game can see with their own eyes. Now, if you ask me what's going on with geometric unity, I can say something very simply that because you have a very large viewership, will go out to many people. You won't understand it, but it'll be over very quickly, and it should be an astounding comment. If you take a Lorentzian metric as a section of a bundle of pointwise Lorentz metrics and pull back the positive Weyl spinners with suitable passing to maximal compact subgroup, you get one generation of petit Salam grand unified fermions. Now, that was very quick, but what it really just...
Being pulled back where? To what? To our initial four-dimensional manifold or what?
Viewership will go out to many people. You won't understand it, but it'll be over very quickly, and it should be an astounding comment. If you take a Lorentzian metric as a section of a bundle of pointwise Lorentz metrics and pull back the positive Weyl spinners with suitable passing to maximal compact subgroup, you get one generation of petit Salam grand unified fermions. Now, that was very quick.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've looked at the short review of his geometric unity. Yeah, I guess he is talking about the space of metrics on a four-dimensional space, and he then consider like a spinner bundle on it, and then he wants to pull back this bundle along the embedding of the zero section into the space of all metrics, right? And I guess his claim is that he can reproduce the Fermat content of the standard model. That's probably what he means.
But what it really just said is that general relativity knows the standard model. Anybody...
I don't get why. What has to do with general relativity?
...of Sean's ability should be able to parse that 20-second sojourn and say, is that something we know? Is that something that might be interesting? Then what we'll have is we'll have the typical physicist large language model conversation in which physicists will ask, do you have a new prediction at anything at electroweak scale? Which is a question that doesn't get asked to the string theorists. So you have a differential treatment in which the physicists remember what physics used to be like in the mid-20th century when they're hearing a competitor, and they choose to forget it when they're hearing something that comes from this other community.
Well, yeah, it's kind of a little bit fair. Basically, people are doing the string theory, right? Already ignoring the facts of relation to reality, any predictions, but whenever they see some sort of stuff from outside, they be like, okay, why should be interested? It doesn't make any new predictions. So it's sort of dual standards. Yeah, but I think Sean kind of explained it, right? There is a certain beauty to string theory, and there is a certain feature in it which made people attracted to it. It made it look promising. So now, indeed, like as he said, a certain burden of proof. If you want to present a theory which would be anyhow better than string theory, right? You have to, you have to offer more, right? If they're both equally bad, why would anyone like to switch, right? That's, I guess, the point. People like doing what they're doing. It has a lot of mathematical beauty in it. Something else might have less beauty, it could be less interesting, take some time to study it, but at the same time, it's not clear what the promise is. So yeah, there is such an effect.
Hence, I think what you're going to find is if you look at this 3-hour documentary that was just made on geometric unity, which itself has flaws, by a person who does not have a PhD, it evidences the highest level of understanding of geometric unity found in a second person over 41 years of trying to have conversations with physicists who tend to be polarized by one collection of theories led by a single individual.
Now, everybody knows how much I enjoy my tea. Okay. Sean Carroll.
Well, I find it very telling. I don't know, it makes me sad that you are looking for a second opinion about geometric unity and you go to YouTube and see what pops up. I don't think that's the standard to which we would like to aspire. There are professional physicists right there in your country who work on understanding quantum gravity, field theory, geometry at a deep level, and you could ask them what they think. Look, there's a lot of...
No, I'm not sure it's fair. This guy who they were just showing, he made like a 3-hour technical review of this theory, and I'm sure no physicists have done this. And I'm sure if Piers would went onto this physics department, say in Oxford or whatever, and start asking about geometric unity, the answer he would get would be something like, "What? I don't even know what it is," or like, "Yeah, I haven't read it," right? Because people are busy with their own things, right? I don't think anyone would like to spend the time reading some long manuscript without, enough promise, enough value for themselves. And it's just people don't think it's a good investment of time. So again, it's very fair that Piers look at this 3-hour review on YouTube. Like, I understand why Sean is upset about it.
I've talked so far about sociology, and I'd much rather talk about physics. But I would like to let people out there know who might be working outside the academic physics community that it is 100% possible to have a good idea and have it have an impact on what physicists do. But it's not easy. You have to do a certain amount of work to show that your theory is worth the time, that it is respectable, that it is interesting, that it is promising. The first thing you got to do is make sure that your theory makes contact with modern physics as it is understood. If you have a new paper out, physicists are going to look at it. They're going to look for, where's the Lagrangian? Where's the interactions? Is the proton stable? Is there dark matter? Like, how does it fit into what I already know?
Those are all different levels of the stack.
Eric's paper has none of that. You would also ask, has the theory been shown to be viable in a very basic way? Is it stable? Is it free of anomalies? Is it finite in the sense of the quantum mechanical calculation that I already mentioned? Again, none of that is there. Are there any new predictions? Eric says, and completely correctly, string theory doesn't make any new predictions either. But also, I really don't want people to get the idea that string theory has some dominant picture. In my department at Johns Hopkins, we have... Let me just finish and then you can talk. I think it's a good system. In my department at Johns Hopkins, we have 6 professors in the theoretical physics group. One of them does string theory, and even he only does it sort of half-time. I wish we had more, honestly. This is very typical. Even at the most stringy departments, it's maybe half the people who do string theory. There are plenty of other approaches being advocated, and many of them do make different predictions.
Yeah, I agree. Nobody likes string theorists anymore. It's not like the dominant. People feel reluctant to hire us, right? Nobody really is excited about it as much as it used to be. So there is a certain back reaction, certain feedback for like not producing any measurable outcome, even in academia.
And we're looking for them in cosmology and astrophysics and elsewhere. And finally, does your theory solve any interesting problems that we already thought we had? That's the reason why string theory became interesting, because we had this problem with quantum gravity that it gave infinite answers, and string theory solved that problem. And again, I see none of that in Eric's paper. So it's very possible that somewhere in Eric's theory there are interesting ideas, but he has given us no reason to think that it is a promising theory. I encourage other people who would like to have an impact on the research agenda of modern physics to take these easy steps rather than going on podcasts and talking about their victimization.
Yeah, overall, I agree with him that Eric is kind of misleading in a certain way. Indeed, that people follow the string theory not just because of Edward Wheaton. They more like followed these ideas because they were really good, and there were many people working on it, not just Edward Wheaton. And indeed, if somebody from outside of the mainstream would produce something truly valuable, yeah, they would certainly pay attention to it. It's not, I would say, it's not as corrupt as Eric is trying to present it. that they're just some sort of dogmatic gatekeepers who are just hostile to outsiders. It's not exactly like that. No, it's just indeed fair to say that nobody really produced anything more significant either. So that's my take. However, I must say that Sean is also missing a very important point, which Eric is kind of trying to communicate, but he's making it in a very confusing way. The whole reason, I think, that why we only have one big idea, which kind of got blown up like a bubble, right? Solving departments of the departments without producing, any measurable results, is essentially due to the way we structure our academia. I think it's related to the fact that it's essentially a central planned economy, that we have this grant system, and indeed we have this self-sustaining loops where somebody come up with some idea, people start working on it, a lot of people start working because it's fun, because it's interesting, but also there's like a funding questions. You want to get a position, you want to get a grant, right? So you kind of forced to work on mainstream. If you have your own ideas, it's more difficult for you to get funding. That's the problem. That's most likely the reason why we didn't have these good ideas, which Sean is talking about. In some sense, it's not like theoretical physicists are evil and dogmatic here. It's more like they fell victim to this central plan system, which kind of softly pushes all dissent out. They're still relatively open-minded. It's just how this system works. In fact, I recently read a Jared Hoft interview where he also pointed out that all the ideas which scientific community produces today are not really that original. Some of them are kind of new, but not new enough. That's what happens, and I think the main reason for that is monopolization of science, essentially by the government, or at least almost monopolization. I might be wrong, and there might be other reasons, but it's unfair from Sean's side to just say that, hey, look, outside theories are just always bad, so there is no problem. That there is still a problem, which Eric was trying to point out about, complete failure of institutions. So yeah, it's still a failure, I think. It's just very subtle. You can't really see it. You can't really say, oh, look, these people and these people and these people, they're doing something wrong. It's like, no, not really. Like every single person, they could say, what am I supposed to do? What should I work on? Like, just like me. There's no better ideas. Like I'm working on something which people has already developed, and I'm moving maybe into my own direction a little bit, but it's just nothing else I could find. The rest is just, all other forms of research were kind of suffocated in some sense, but not really intentionally. So yeah, that's why I think most of the points kind of valid.
Okay, Eric, it's always a pivotal moment in these debates when you put your glasses on. So I'm bracing myself.
First of all, Sean has been nothing but civil throughout our relationship. He's also extremely nasty, but I really appreciate the civility, and I attempt to respond in kind. Sean and I really shouldn't be divided, but we appear to be. I don't understand it. He did respond. It just shows that none of this is serious. Speaking about what I'm talking about, he said, this is not something that is going to be a thing. He also says that he hasn't read it. So let me say a bunch of things to Dr. Carroll. Dr. Carroll, I'd like to hear your explanation for 3 generations of flavor chiral fermions with the observed quantum numbers under the group SU3 cross SU2 cross U1. In another podcast, you said, before I listen to your theory, you should listen to my Sean Carroll's theory. My theory is known as the standard model. I can give you an explanation for why SU3 cross SU2 cross U1, why there are 3 generations, why 16 particles in a generation, why the observed quantum numbers are the way they are, why the Higgs sector comes out of seemingly nowhere with a quartic potential, with a quadratic term, why the Yukawa coupling is just there, just so in order to produce mass when the weak force forbids a mass directly in the Dirac operator. Sean knows what every single thing that I just said is.
Well, basically, yeah, he's talking about, so to say, naturality questions of standard model. Maybe I should put it that way. In a sense that we have a theory, right, which works, which it agrees with its prediction agrees with experiment, right? But it has this almost seemingly arbitrary numbers in it, arbitrary parameters, like the ranks of the gauge groups, SU3 times SU2 times U1, like why they should be like this, or why we have indeed, like he says, 3 generations of fermions. Yeah, I don't know whether it's a problem, right? Indeed, I think everybody would prefer to have some sort of beautiful explanation for why there could be nothing else. But I would like to point out that it doesn't have to be. Like, not necessarily we need to have some sort of answer to this question. It could indeed be just spontaneous. Like, I agree it's unlikely. Partially, maybe the anomaly constellation for gauge symmetry is the answer. That explains the charges of quarks to some extent. But overall, yeah, I don't know the answer to this question. I'm not sure. I don't know whether the answer actually exists. For quartic potential for Higgs, well, that's just, I guess, the last possible term which still allows renormalizability of the theory. Terms higher than 4th order would violate this. However, I'm not sure we still care about it if we don't think that standard model is itself fundamental. I don't know, he made some important claims. I don't know whether he actually had the answers. Also, I haven't read his full theory. It seems unlikely, of course. But let's listen to Sean's response. I don't know what to say.
Why Sean chooses to misportray the fact that I can say why there should be dark matter, what the dark energy is, what the exact quantum number assignments are for the 2 families that are luminous that are yet to be seen. I have no idea, because Sean also proudly says is that he hasn't looked at it and hasn't read it. That's why he says that there are no Lagrangians in it. I have no idea where Sean gets this stuff. Sean is insistent that the idea that somehow I am not choosing to go through the usual channels and instead talking as he is right now via YouTube is somehow significant when I've just given talks in 3 different countries on dark energy. And by the way, every time I talk about talking about this, somebody is telling me don't talk about the fact that you're actually in a physics department. And what I'm trying to tell you is I give talks in physics departments, I hang out with physics colleagues, I'm welcomed at places like the Institute for Advanced Study, MIT, et cetera, and yet I have to deal with this nonsense. I talk to both physics colleagues. You know, right now you've got a giant problem called something called DESI or DESI, the dark energy, spectroscopic instrument, which is at the moment going after Einstein's unwanted cosmological constant. That is not a constant. The dark energy is not a constant term. That is the only term
I don't know about this thesis, unfortunately.
that you can put into the Einstein field equations, because the Einsteinian curvature satisfies an automatic differential equation called divergence free. So if you have another term in the equation, it has to have the same property. There's only one known automatic equation, which is that the metric of Einstein that creates space-time is annihilated by its own Levi-Civita connection. And Sean, you're misrepresenting things, because I'm going to give a formula for the dark energy. I do all sorts of things that you have no idea of, because your attitude, which you repeat in other podcasts, and I highly advise you to spend more time in your physics department and less time on YouTube, is that this is not a serious thing. Nobody's taking it seriously. And your misportrayal of the situation is nearly constant for reasons that completely elude me.
Sean? The good news is I have read Eric's paper. Here it is. I actually have it here, right here. And it's worse than you would think. You know, it just very quickly, it starts off by saying the author is not a physicist and is no longer an active academician, but is an entertainer and host of a podcast. This work of entertainment is a draft work in progress.
Well, it's fine, doesn't matter.
And it may not be built upon. So we're not allowed to think about Eric's theory and write a follow-up paper about it. In
You're very much allowed, Sean.
To everything that is normally done in scientific discourse. You hope that people build upon your theories. You don't try to prevent them. And later on, it says,
Sean,
this document is an attempt to begin recovering. I'm going to read this. This document is an attempt to begin recovering a rather more complete theory, which at this point is only partially remembered and stitched together from old computer files, notebooks, recordings, and the like, dating back to as far as 1983. And this is why this paper is not going to appear in the peer-reviewed literature. It's not serious. It's a dog ate my homework kind of thing. If you have a dark matter thing, if you have a dark matter prediction, if you have a dark energy prediction, I want to see a plot in the paper. I want to see redshift versus distance. I want to see a calculation of a relic abundance so I can figure out how much dark matter is supposed to be. If you do that, people will pay attention to the theory. It's very possible.
Sean, first of all, how dare you? Second of all, if you're going to go by the standards of the No, Sean, how dare you cast shade and aspersions of the kind that I wouldn't seek to cast on you, but I will now.
Okay.
I'm not seeking your favor, nor do I need to seek your approval. As you know, you failed to gain tenure at the University of Chicago. You're not highly regarded in the field. And again, I'm only returning the shade in which you just yourself cast. I wouldn't have done this otherwise.
It's so rude. I mean, it's just rude.
You then spent time as a non-tenured faculty at Caltech, and you only gained tenure in a non-standard professorship. You're not a leading person in the field. My belief structure about this is that you imagine that I'm coming to you saying,
I don't know why you bring it up, like as I imagine their own credentials, each other's credentials, it's kind of low.
Oh, Sean Carroll, tell me which graph I should do so that I can please you. As you know, because you've read the paper, it's
just him, it's everyone. I must say, it was a reasonable standard. Like, I think that Sean gave him a really valuable advice. It's true that it would attract more attention if it would be making some predictions or would be better written, yeah.
What you said about Lagrangians is false. What you said about predictions is false. My concern is what you did is that you seized upon something where people had built on my ideas since 1994. The equations that Natty Seiberg and Ed Witten introduced that took over the world were called the insufficiently nonlinear equations when I was at Harvard in 1987 and introduced them. The question is why appear as an entertainer rather than as a physicist? First,
yeah, this stuff with Seiberg-Witten equations, I already heard. Yeah, that's why I'm actually prepared. Because that's not the first time I've heard about Eric Weinstein. I've seen Joe Rogan episode. I haven't seen it fully, but parts from it. And that's where he said this first time, that he supposedly is the one who discovered Seiberg-Witten equations. Look, I'll show you the
Spinors and spinors have
video.
nothing to do with something called self-duality, that I violated the spin statistics theorem, a whole bunch of things. And I was invited to leave Harvard, where they said, you have to move out of Massachusetts. You cannot live in Massachusetts. And I said, you don't have the right to tell me where I can live. It's not part of our agreement. They said, well, if you want to continue in this department, you have to move out of Massachusetts.
What was the reasoning behind that?
They thought I was wrong and crazy.
So, but
Well, let me keep.
okay.
So he's gonna tell this teardropping story.
1994, Ed Witten is giving a lecture in the main seminar room in Building 2 in the MIT Math Department, where I am now a postdoc under a National Science Foundation fellowship. So I had gone through huge trouble and I crawled back on top. And Ed Witten says the self-duality revolution, which is related to Jim Simon's work, which I was saying before, he says, theoretically, you don't have to deal with these super complicated equations anymore. And he doesn't say what replaces them. And a guy named, I think, Alan Knudsen, who's now at Cornell, I think raises his hand like a punk. And he says, do you want to tell us what equations we would use instead? And Ed Witten writes down these set of two equations. And I look at them and I say, those are the equations that I proposed at Harvard in like 5 years ago, or was it 7 years ago. And I said, that's really interesting. He's about to get told that they're insufficiently nonlinear, that they involve spinors, which can't possibly involve self-duality, and that he's violated spin statistics. And I'm looking forward to watching what happens when Ed Witten is told this.
Yeah, so I guess maybe we should find equations. Yeah, I already was looking for it. So yeah, the story which he tells about Witten coming up with this idea is correct, I think. That there was this D'Alençon theory, D'Alençon invariance, and they are basically built upon the gauge theory with non-abelian gauge group SU2, which is something difficult, something hard. And as he said, Witten said, no, we don't have to do something that difficult. We could get the same information, or similar information, easier. And he had this physical intuition about what's happening, in this gauge theory, that we have a Higgs mechanism in it, and non-diagonal parts in SU2 group in the corresponding gauge boson will become massive, and you'll only be left with U1 part in the low energy. But because of all the supersymmetry and stuff, it still contains the same information after the what's called topological twist, or almost the same. And he wrote down simpler equations, which indeed were built upon like U1 gauge theory. So yeah, they are very famous, very important, and it's kind of brilliant discovery. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like his comments come from some sort of misunderstanding what the requirements should be, because he's talking about the requirements for theory to be physical, to describe, the real world, but that has nothing to do with the real world. That's a set of equations in some unphysical field theory, which help mathematicians to study the invariance of four manifolds. It's more like a math discovery. So I don't know why he's accusing Witten of something like this. I don't know.
A couple weeks later, I'm at the MIT commissary with Isinger and the math physics group. And a guy named András Senes, Hungarian brilliant guy, now in Geneva, I think, says, have you heard the news? He comes by. I said, what news? All of Donaldson theory in self-dual equations is falling. It's like, what? It's like, they were using the wrong equations. Everything has become trivially easy. Can you bring up an article called...
Well, yeah, so I don't know, was it trivially easy? People still study Donaldson theory, but it's kind of fair, yeah. The U1 theory is way simpler.
Gauge theory is dead, long live gauge theory. So, like, I didn't want to tell these stories the last time. This is like super painful, but I'm done with this stuff. I'm just completely done with this. So, you see, there was this thing called the self-dual equations, which Isidore Singer brought to Michael Atiyah and Nigel Hitchen. Oh, the other one was if spinners were involved, Nigel Hitchen would know and he would have told us, which is bullshit. Keep going to the next page. The new gauge theory. You see those two equations? dA of phi equals 0. I had written psi rather than phi. Phi has to do with the spin of the field. But Fa plus equals I. I had written these things down in a slightly different form and had been effectively laughed out of Harvard for this. And it turns out that what was going on was Ed Witten had written these things down, and now all of these people were converted. And a lecture is given at room 507 in the Harvard Math Department on the 5th floor, across from the office of a guy named Raoul Bott, who is absolutely not my advisor, but the internet is determined to make him my advisor. It's making me really upset. Raoul Bott is my hero, but he was not my advisor. He's a great man, and you shouldn't do that to him, and you shouldn't do that to me. So I go to this lecture, and the person giving it was really the closest thing I had to an advisor, if it's not a guy named Dror Bar-Natan, is a brother of somebody you've had on your program. You've had Gary Taubes on your program. His brother is named Clifford Taubes. And Clifford Taubes had picked a fight with Princeton. And he had said, you know, these guys at Princeton, we work our asses off to get these results in Donaldson theory. These equations are so hard, and then always after the fact, Princeton tells us what we're really doing. You know, thanks, guy. So it was a fight between Cambridge and Princeton. And now he's got to eat crow, okay? So he's giving this lecture, and he titles it, Witten's Magical Equations. This is the same guy who tells me that I can't live in Massachusetts in 1987.
Weird.
And he's going on, he's like saying, this is the greatest day of my life. I was in prison, I was working at hard labor for 10 years. These equations make everything trivially easy. I am sitting in the back row of room 507, picking my nose. And a guy in the front seat, on the right-hand side, is named David Kazdan, one of the most brilliant people on the planet.
Yes, very famous mathematician. Very strong.
And he usually falls asleep during the lecture. He's like a Soviet Jew who got through the anti-Semitic system at Moscow State, like unbelievable mind. And he says, excuse me, Cliff, didn't we have a student at some point who told us to look at the spinner bundles and maybe these equations? And Cliff goes white as a ghost, and I'm picking my nose, right nostril, and the entire room swivels and looks at me. And then I realize, like, everybody actually remembers what I was saying, and my thesis is on the spinner bundles, all this stuff. And I have this question, do I tell them the whole theory? And I left mathematics at that moment. I just decided, I can't trust you people. Cliff knows the answer. Cliff is supposed to say, you know, Eric told me to look at that. And he won't do it. He's sitting there giving the credit, not even to Seiberg and Witten, who are the two people who do these equations. He's giving the whole thing to Witten because he's scared, because he's apologizing. He's saying, I screwed up. I doubted you, Princeton. Princeton was right. Harvard was wrong. New Jersey beats Massachusetts. Tough shit. That's the way it goes.
Well, that's true.
But
okay.
Massachusetts actually had an entrant in that game, and that was me. And then Isidore Singer writes somewhere in one of his papers, you know, I learned about this years ago, before from Eric Weinstein, a paper with Cano and Ballou. So this was my trajectory. This is why I left mathematics in part, because I realized that there was just no honor. There was no way of making a name and Like people are just going to give away my stuff. So when I did this draft of GU, I said I'm an entertainer. People don't.
Yeah, so after I heard this, right, this story, I don't know whether it's true, right? So I thought, okay, I want to check it. Like he made a verifiable claim that he derived this equation, right? And I thought, okay, he mentioned his thesis, so here it is. You could scroll down. By the way, presented by Eric Weinstein, candidate's degree of Doctor of Philosophy, and hereby certified its worthy of acceptance. And signature of Raoul Bot and Dor Barnatan. Yeah, so who was his advisor? Not clear, right? I don't know, it doesn't say here. But indeed, two people on the committee who signed it was Raoul Bot and Dror Barnatan. Yeah, I agree, it's a bit confusing, but it doesn't matter. We could read the abstract. It's concerned with, you see, elliptic generalization of Einstein equations, Seldoux and Seldoux-Young's equation in 8 manifolds, right? So Seiberg-Witten equations, there are for 4 manifolds. Well, I guess at least like conventionally, right? You see, oriented 4 manifolds. Maybe he means some sort of generalization, but anyway, so you could see how the paper looks like, and he has certain examples, and somewhere here he starts talking about dimension 4. So he has dimension 4 as like a consequence of something, and you could go straight to there, but I honestly scroll through the whole paper to just look for something like Seiberg-Witten equations, and I found none of that. I don't know. That's where you start talking about 4 dimensions, right? Before this, it was just something 8-dimensional, right? Here's the Dirac operators. Note this. So anyway, you could read it yourself. 4 dimension starts here. Where? Here. Here it's talking about a space of metrics on 4 manifolds. You see n equals to 4. How he writes down the Einstein equations. Here they are. But I don't quite see anything like Seiberg-Witten equations here. Here you see it goes back to dimension 6, 7, 8, right? This one has some projection, so it doesn't have fermions, it doesn't have terms, quadratic and fermions, right? Like it should be. Shit, I don't like the way this article is written. Let's find. what he said. He founded Joe Rogan. Yeah. Yeah, here they are. So I don't know what you mean by similar like equations here. They're just not here. And I see nothing similar. So I don't know. That's basically the end. And here you start talking about what's later I guess will become geometric unity. He's talking about physical motivation for the present work. And he says consider x 1 3 Lorentzian spacetime, right, with spin structure and its bundle and so on. This is the gauge group of standard model. He's talking about fermions in it, and then he outlines this construction that he embeds his 4-dimensional spacetime into high-dimensional space. I guess in his final paper it will be 14-dimensional. And then he said we'll consider Dirac operator on this high-dimensional space, and then we have to restrict it to the image of the embedding, and we'll get some sort of Dirac operators with values in this spinor bundles of the normal bundle. Actually, I don't know even whether this formula is correct. It seems like it should only work for G even. I don't know. I'm not even sure it will work for G even. But anyway, yeah. See feasibility, we'll discuss the case G equals to 10. But there is nothing really here after it. It's just some sort of vague idea, at least at this point. And that's all. The paper ends. So there is no Seiberg-Witten equations or anything like them in his thesis at all. I don't know, here he's studying some sort of spinor bundles. But you couldn't just say that, oh, I studied spinor bundles, so that means I should be credited with discovery of Seiberg-Witten equations. It's not like this. I mean, it's more than just spinor bundles. You need to understand what kind of quantum field theory you write for them, and what topological twist you choose for this supersymmetric theory, and which equation you get out of them, and what does it even mean. I guess none of this was done by Eric Weinstein, so I don't know what he's upset about. It's like I'm not sure he's lying. It's more like the person just have kind of wrong sensitivity towards what he should be given credit for. I think that's what kind of happening. I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know what the story with Kashtan is true. So he presents himself like he has been wronged, and Witten was kind of treated differently for the same ideas, but I just don't see the same ideas here at all. And I feel like maybe he just misunderstood what Witten's results were and why it was so exciting. I don't know, this case looked very, very weird. So I was actually reluctant to spend my time on reading geometric unity because of that, because I just thought like he's already baited me once. I feel like I'll just spend my time on something meaningless again.
First of all, neither you nor I are trained as physicists, Sean. You're actually trained as an astronomer. What you have in this situation is that you and I are both interloping in a field that is not the one to which we trained. That doesn't bother me about what you're doing. I've enjoyed some of your papers. I've thought very poorly of others. You have a wide range of interests. I think you're very creative. Your intellectually insulting aspect reminds me of you as the Marie Antoinette of theoretical physics influencers. I'm not here to please you. You know that there are tables in the document that you're reading that have plenty of predictions. You know that it solves plenty of problems. What you are doing is creating an environment of fear where every university worries, what does it mean to talk to this person? And what I would say to you is you are commenting on the effect that you are in fact inducing. You and a small cadre of people are like intellectual border collies of the physical sciences, casting shade and aspersions on those who are succeeding where the quantum gravity, string theoretic, and M theoretic programs are failing.
Sean? Look, I mean, I didn't say anything about Eric as a person, his history, or anything like that. I said things about the paper. Everything he says about me is like 90% true, as many things he says. The paper is not giving us any reason to think that this approach is promising. There is no quantum mechanics in the paper. There's no attempt at showing that this solves any of the known problems of quantum gravity. Again, it's not just about Eric, it's about anyone. If you want to make an impact on the physics research community, you have to give them a reason to think that what you do is promising.
Yeah, I agree. I also haven't read the paper, like I told you, here it is. It's pretty long, right? It has its own notations. Yeah, I guess a long text without formulas, and then yes, that's the main part of it. Yeah, I don't know what he means by tables of predictions. Maybe it's in the end. Field content. So I guess he is making prediction, yeah, for the field content. That's what he means. Okay, yes, you can see it's pretty long, and yeah, I'm afraid if I start reading it, I'll just might waste my time, right? I read a review of it by this guy. You see, on April 2nd, Eric Weinstein released a video of his Oxford lecture in which he presents his theory of everything, geometric unity. So yeah, the video is like 3 hours long. It's principal watchable. Yeah, he's discussing theory. In this interview, Weinstein laments that the scientific community is dismissive of GU because he hasn't read the technical paper, but insisted that scientists should be able to understand the substantive content of GU from the lecture alone. Okay. And by the way, he also mentioned the same problem. I also became increasingly skeptical of Weinstein's claim when I pressed him about his alleged discovery of the Zygmuth equation before Zygmuth and Witten. The set of equations which was central focus of my PhD thesis and several resultant papers. When I asked Weinstein for certain mathematical details about how he had arrived at the Zygmuth equation, his vague response led me to doubt his claims. Yeah, that's what I fear what happened, because there is no equations here, just something about spinor bundles. Oh, what it was. Okay. This difficulty communicating with Weinstein is what motivated our response paper. And yes, the paper is here. That's the response. It's just, yeah, it's way shorter. It's just like 10 pages. So this thing I have read. Yeah, so the setup is somewhat clear. Again, as I already said, the idea is we consider the space of all possible metrics on our remaining four-dimensional space-time. It's basically a trivial trivial vector bundle with 10-dimensional fibers. So it's a 14-dimensional manifold whose sections are precisely the remaining matrix on X. Yeah, when X is our space-time. And then we study, yeah, the spinor bundle on it, which is again would be 2 to the power 7, yeah, dimension divided by half, dimensional vector bundle, right? A complex vector bundle, which how they call it? That has no name. Then, yeah, we include our spin group into this U128 for some reason. I guess it will become clear later. And yeah, here we go on talking about how we define our gauge groups. And at some point, the main player in writing down equation is this Shiab operator, which uses this auxiliary entity like phi, auxiliary field. Which I guess, yeah, is needed for this kind of identification. Yeah, here they explain why we needed to embed our spin group into this U128, because now we have a magical matching of dimensions between the exterior algebra of a tangent space of U, which is 2 to the power 14 dimensional, and our group, right, which is also 2 to the power 14 dimensional. Yep, 2 to the power 7 times 2 to the power 7. And these people, however, object that canonical isomorphism is only possible after complexification. And there is no really complexification mentioned. Yeah, however, note that we cannot define a Shiab operator without complexification, since in general we have no isomorphism. This follows from the fact that there is no natural vector space isomorphism between U algebra of unitary lattices of size 128 and the real Clifford algebra in dimensions 14, which is the algebra of 128 and 128 real matrices. Thus, we are left with the conclusion that Weinstein has either failed to mention or annotate the classification step, or else has made a fundamental error. If you are charitable and assume the former, then this immediately raises problems as a pre-quantum classical theory. Well, because they say, okay, by complexification the space of connections and hence the gauge group, the resulting quantum field theory will either fail to be unitary, because the quantum numbers will not be Hermitian, or the Hamiltonian, because energy spectrum unbound in both positive and negative directions. Neither option is tenable. Yeah, I don't know, maybe it requires some explanation from his side. Maybe he chooses some sort of non-canonical identification here. Or he doesn't care about the thing being complex. Maybe he's not even quantizing his theory in the usual sense. I don't know what he means here. And they also mentioned indeed that if you use this huge group U128, you will have chiral anomaly in it if you try to quantize it. Yeah, you will not be able to make it into actual gauge group on the quantum level. And they say, yeah, it could have worked if we used spin 14 instead, but we can't because this thing will not have matching dimensions then, which is necessary for the existence she-up operator. Yes, so I don't know what to think about it. The biggest problem, I guess, for me is that they didn't explain what do we do with this four-dimensional space after it. Like, do we need to dimensionally reduce? Like he advises here in his thesis, some sort of procedure like this, restrict to the image of the immersion of space-time. I don't know. They didn't mention it in the in this review. Yeah. Weinstein also provides a list of issues that GU has toward the end. One of which is that the theory leaves on U a 14-dimensional space, and it's unclear how to recover a theory that's applicable to our 4-dimensional universe. Our conclusion is that even supposing the previous technical concerns could be addressed, the volume of missing on explicit computations renders the formation of GU largely incomplete. Yeah, and they conclude with the fourth Freeman-Dyson. It's better to be wrong than to be vague. And here is the post of this person after the draft was published. Yes, it all happened before even this draft was out. It was just the comment on his lecture. And he said that unfortunately in the few pages dedicated to explaining the sharp operator, what Eric provides is the following. The particulars of sharp operators are workmanlike and not of much interest. The interesting aspect of them is they all essentially look like contracting over indices in the fashion familiar from Riemann tensor geometry. That makes me feel like that he was using some non-canonical identifications. But with some aspect of conjugation with the gauge group element, living inside the homogeneous gauge group G as a nonlinear sigma field of sorts. And the author remembers choosing them years ago with representation theory techniques involving high-state representations rather than by the more indicial methods presented here with invariant elements Phi. Okay. And the advantage was that the Bianchi identity was able to pick the best and most appropriate operator in different circumstances. Unfortunately, the author is no longer conversant in that language and has been unable to locate the notes from decades ago that originally picked out the operator of choice to play the role of the swerve here. Swerve. I don't know what it is. The author either hopes to find the original calculations or to get back to the point where he can reconstruct this argument based on using the Bianchi identity to guarantee gauge perpendicularity and or use the Bianchi identity to guarantee automatic solution of a differential equation in the curvature. Yeah, and objections about anomalies supersting go completely unaddressed. So yeah, it sounds like, indeed, like what Sean Carroll said, it's some sort of "don't read my homework" excuse. So I don't know. Because of that, I feel kind of reluctant to spend my time on reading the whole paper. Just I'm afraid it will take me to nowhere. I could do it if this video gets like, I don't know, 100,000 views or something. So they see that there is certain demand for this type of work. Because just I don't see the real value. And as again, these people, Sean pointed out, what exactly he has done. Like, it's not even a quantum theory, right? He only gets some sort of equations. He probably expected someone else will build on his work, but I don't know. I'm not sure anybody will do it. First of all, people have to work on mainstream, as I tried to explain. They don't have time to spend on something else. Otherwise, they will not get a job. They will not be able to feed their families, right? But even for me, when I'm already not working on mainstream, it still doesn't feel attractive enough. Like, the things which I'm working on right now is more exciting for me than this. So I don't know whether I should look into it. But let's finish the interview.
Sean, you have a serious problem with dark energy that you're developing, and it's going to go right through having being a problem with lambda CDM to eventually being a problem with the Einstein field equations themselves, perched as they are atop the space of metrics as a completely inadequate space of field content. What you've just said and what the aspersion you have just cast, you are simply not qualified to say. What you have said is that I have given no reason. Let me imagine that paper, which was a draft rushed to get to an April 1st date, remains in a world where Sam Altman and Elon Musk continue to compete for better and better AIs. What would you say if at some point those AIs then got to that paper and said, holy cow, that is exactly what we've been missing. This thing solves all sorts of problems, and the problem that we have is that a group of influencers with a penchant for being, and this is becoming one of my least favorite words, although I didn't have any negative association until recently, debunkers. The problem, Sean, is that you and I are naturally alive on almost everything. We're not very far apart. I don't disagree with the standard model. I think the standard model is the most beautiful piece of differential geometry before it becomes theoretical physics. But one of the things that you just said is that it's a classical field theory that is not quantized. As you well know, there was a revolution in the 1970s which said that we blew Hamiltonian analysis and that in fact every phase space carrying a symplectic form can be treated locally as if that symplectic form is the curvature of a line bundle, and the L2 sections of that line bundle form a Hilbert space, and the P and Q.
Yeah, he's talking about what's called geometric quantization. The way how you get a Hilbert space out of classical symplectic geometry, which is what we have in classical mechanics, is essentially working with phase space which has a symplectic form on it. And there is a prescription how to assign a quantum theory to every such space, but this prescription doesn't work like universally. It's more like an art. So again, you can just apply it, for example, to gravity, right?
Coordinate functions can be promoted to operators. It's said that wine is what you get when you stop grape juice from becoming vinegar. And in fact, Hamiltonian analysis is what happens when you take a physical problem and you stop it from quantizing itself. That was one of the great errors of our time, that Hamiltonian analysis was actually pointing the way to saying that most classical problems contain the seeds of their own quantization. You know all this stuff, and I know this stuff. We know.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, you could say, well, I don't know. I mean, the Hamiltonian approach naturally leads to quantization. I don't know.
The same people. We probably can work in the same notation. My guess is that if you and I got over whatever this bizarre tension is between us and buried the hatchet, my guess is that after 2 days you'd say, boy, I really just didn't understand what he was saying.
You know what? I would love that to be the case, and maybe you guys can make that happen. Talking of dark energy, a little bit of dark energy has crept into this debate. So I'm going to try and end on a slightly lighter note. And these will require much shorter responses. I just want to see whether you guys, I mean, as you said, Eric, you agree about a lot of stuff. Do you agree about...
Most things.
Yeah, most things. I want to ask whether you agree about some of these fundamental things, which have struck me as interesting about where we are. Professor Stephen Hawking, I did the last television interview that he ever gave before he died. He said that the biggest threat to mankind was if artificial intelligence learned to self-design. Do you agree, Sean?
No, I don't think that's the biggest threat to mankind. I think that AI is a threat, but in a completely different way than is usually portrayed. The AIs that we're working on now are not really the kind that will reach general intelligence in the way that we think about it. There's no obstacle to reaching that in principle, but the currently popular architectures aren't on that trajectory. The real problem, as we saw just this week...
Yeah, I also think so. I mean, the primitive linear structure, right?
With the Chicago Sun-Times is people are lazy and people use AI for the wrong reasons. This was a very, very trivial example where they published an article about the fun summer book reads this year, which was completely hallucinated by an AI, and they just published it in the newspaper. That doesn't really hurt anybody, but when these architectures are being put to work in things that could actually hurt people, that's when AI is going to have a really bad impact.
Eric?
I would say that I completely agree with Sean. I believe that the biggest problem and threat to humanity is that we share a single atmosphere. We can have different land masses, but we have to share one atmosphere, and that pathogens, radiation, and climate are all bound up in this one resource. And I would say that the biggest problem that I'm seeing is a general madness in the American political system on both left and right, where we went from being the thing that was like the control rod stopping the world from going critical to a crazy isolationist perspective where the Democratic Party is not able to restrain the worst excesses of the Republican Party, and conversely. And I fear that what we're going to see is a move towards nuclear proliferation, which remains the single greatest threat, which is what we physics people unleashed in November of 1952 at a thermonuclear level. And I think since we've never used such a thing in anger, and we've had a test ban treaty since the early 60s, we are completely unprepared for what the cost is of retreating as the world's policeman.
Fascinating. Sean?
Well, yeah, I guess I could say the wrong ideas here will ruin our society in general.
Will we ever be able to time travel, either forwards or back?
Well, forwards, I time travel all the time. Yesterday, I time traveled 24 hours into the future, and here I am. I mean, that's not that hard. Einstein showed us that there's a trick. You can even travel into the future faster by either moving near the speed of light or by hanging out in a strong gravitational field like a black hole. Backwards in time, no. I don't think that we're going to be able to do it. I've written papers about it. It's something that is, I would say, conceivable but not plausible. We know how it might work in principle, but all of the indications are it's not going to work in practice.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess the papers about it's more like there are closed time-like trajectories in somewhere inside this abstract mathematical solutions of rotating black holes. Yeah, but it doesn't mean they're real. Yeah, and it's not really a space travel or time travel in the usual sense. Yeah, I don't know.
Eric?
Well, as Sean has thoroughly digested my paper, he knows that I believe that there are either 5 or 7 dimensions of time in a 14-dimensional world, which is split 5 of time, 9 of space, or 7 of time, 7 of space. So when you talk about time travel, it's times travel. And only when time is one-dimensional is there an arrow of time. If there were 2 dimensions of time, you'd have a whirlpool. 3 dimensions would result in a right-hand rule of time. These things are technically called orientations. One of the things that is really interesting about multiple dimensions of time, which leads to something which is very poorly studied called ultra-hyperbolic equations, is that you have the opportunity of going back in time without going back through time. So just as you can play a record, and when the stylus comes to the inner circles of the record, you can jump again to any track that you like. On a cassette tape, you have to go back through time. So my belief is no, we will not go back through time, but we will have to figure out how to stop thinking in terms of initial conditions, because it is only in the case of a single dimension of time leading to hyperbolic equations that you have that luxury. So I think that times travel is going to be perhaps the most interesting thing to come out when you ask, why should we worry about these things? Buckle up.
Fascinating.
Well, yeah, I know that in his theory, his four-dimensional space, it has different signatures, right? So signature is what determines what time is. So yeah, you could have imagine all sorts of abstraction there. But even in four-dimensional space, maybe you could imagine, some form of singularities where time loses sense. I don't know. Yeah.
Fascinating. And my final question is probably the biggest question I can ask any guest. I've asked quite a few of them. I have to say with very limited responses. So I'm asking two highly intelligent people this question now, which is, I happen to believe in God. And the reason I do, other than the fact I was reared as a Catholic by my mother, is because I genuinely think there must be a superior being out there who is able to answer this fundamental question in a way no human being has been able to answer it for me, which is, for those who believe in the Big Bang Theory, what was there before the Big Bang? In other words, what was nothing and what was there before nothing? And because I do not believe a human brain can answer that question, there must be, de facto, a more superior thing out there that can. Sean?
Well, I'm glad to be the one who frees you from your religious convictions, because the human brain can absolutely tackle that question, and it does so all the time. I encourage viewers/listeners to listen to the upcoming episode of my podcast called Mindscape, where I talk to Nies Afshorty and Phil Halper about exactly this question. What happened at or before the Big Bang?
Yeah.
We don't know the answer. We don't even know whether the Big Bang was the beginning.
Well, there you go.
So with the fact that we don't know doesn't mean we can't know. Those are two very different statements.
Well, if you don't know, you can't know at the moment. Surely you have to admit you don't know.
I don't know, and we're doing science on it in the hopes that we will know.
But
That's how
with
science
respect,
works.
Sean, with respect, it is utterly impossible. You will never, as a human being, be able to tell me what was there before nothing. How can you? You can't comprehend it, can you?
I
I don't know what he mean before nothing. I think it's some sort of philosophical corruption. But I don't know what the problem with Sean's position is for him.
With the theory, I show that the theory fits the data. That's how we do it.
What was there before nothing then? Go on, best guess.
We don't know. My personal favorite theory is there was a pre-existing universe out of which our cosmos arose as a baby universe.
And what was there before that?
Quantum fluctuation.
What was there before that?
No, it's infinite. It's infinite in time in both directions.
Yeah, exactly. I know it's hard to imagine, but this inflation theory predicts that we have some sort of infinite thin throat, right? Something like this could continue like this forever, backwards in time. In fact, it's funny that that's a possibility which Aristotle missed in his proof of God existence, that we could have a causal chain going back infinitely far away. It might be something else. It could be something else. We could come up with all sorts of four-dimensional geometries. As I said, maybe time wasn't even defined there as a coordinate. Maybe it's just a wrong question. Maybe there was no actual causality there. I don't know.
So what was there before? So you mean it's never ending?
Yeah. I wrote a book, if you want to read it, Piers.
I do.
From Eternity to Here. It's a great book.
I do, but what's there before eternity?
There was no such thing as before eternity. What is less than minus infinity? That's not a sensible question to ask.
Yeah, but I think it's a cop-out by you, if you don't mind me saying this very respectfully, to say that something is infinite, because if you're saying it's infinite, you don't have to answer the question. You've just made that up. You don't know it's infinite.
Yeah, there's also like I think a valid debate whether infinity exists in real life. Is it just something counterintuitive, or it's actually non-existent? So maybe Piers is right saying that, well, you're kind of cheating.
very often happens in the progress of human knowledge that a question that we thought was an interesting one becomes not answered but shown to be uninteresting because we get a deeper understanding.
See that? I'm sorry. I'm going to come to you, Eric, on this. That seems to me a very pompous answer. That is basically trying to apply a superior intelligence to a response to a lesser mortal by saying that my attempt to get this question answered is so stupid that there should be no need by the brain power in front of me to answer it.
No, it's exactly the opposite of that. I don't know why people are trying to psychoanalyze me and think about what I'm thinking of them. What I'm saying is the question of what happened before the Big Bang is prima facie a perfectly sensible question to ask. But we need to be open to the possibility that there is no beginning to the universe, that the universe is simply...
Yeah, but that is a ridiculous thing to say, because you know that your human brain cannot comprehend something that has no beginning. How can it? We can't.
I can comprehend the real numbers. They go from minus infinity to infinity. I don't see why it's...
Well, yeah, but they are quite counterintuitive indeed. Yeah, but that's a very interesting discussion. Yeah. Yeah, I guess it's not fair to say that if our brain could not comprehend something, it means it doesn't exist, could not exist.
It's harder to comprehend infinity years versus 14 billion years. That doesn't make sense to me.
All right, Eric, am I mad?
No, I mean, look, one of the things I like, Piers, is that you invite me on this program often not to do battle, as we heard in the previous segment. So let me try something as an offering to the good Dr. Carroll, and you can tell me whether this matches anything, because I also share atheism at some level along with him. What I believe is that you're conflating three different category problems. One, you're talking about something observational, which might terminate at what we would call the surface of last scattering, the thing that we cannot see beyond with our instruments. That takes place along the lines of something, let's say, called the cosmological model, which is a reduction of Einstein's field equations assuming greater symmetry. That is a 1,3 problem where you have one dimension of time, 3 of space, and you can prove that there's something called an essential singularity in the center of a black hole, a Schwarzschild singularity, and an initial singularity in what would be called the Friedmann-Robertson-Walker metric. So that is a map of the territory that we are trying to observe. But there's a third thing, which is an assembly sequence, which also has an ordinal concept of development, which could be confused with a chronological one of time. What is it that built the manifold so that time could progress? Now, the thing that's truly radical about geometric unity, and I think Sean would probably agree with this if he's read it at all, and I'm not sure that he has, is that it is the only theory I know that begins from almost nothing and tries to get, and by theory of everything, we don't mean all knowledge, we mean a complete set of the rules of the universe. What it says is that 4 degrees of freedom are all that is necessary for the quark, lepton, CKM, PMS, et cetera, PNMS structure of the universe. That basically sweet, salty, sour, and bitter, or treble, mid, bass, and reverb is all that's necessary to create a universe. What the point of a theory of everything, which is almost never discussed, and by the way, I would point out that I quite agree with Sean that philosophy, when done well, is an essential complement to understanding physics, lest we be tempted into the wrong kinds of thinking.
Yeah, that's what happened with Piers, I guess.
I would say a theory of everything is a theory that starts from minimal assumptions, recovers all of the rules, and demotivates the further scientific study of the initial set of data used to construct the model. Not that the initial set of data is uninteresting, but that it be interesting to theologians and philosophers rather than be motivating to mathematicians and physicists. And what I would say is, if it's true, imagine we were on the branch where geometric unity has proven itself, and the good Dr. Carroll agrees. What I would say is, at that point, why there are 4 degrees of freedom is not a scientific question. I don't think anybody that I know would be motivated to try to figure out how to get 4 degrees of freedom from nothing. That would be an interesting question, and that is the question upon which your God hinges.
Yeah, but then if he says that, why he's so concerned about the fact that there's SU3, SU2 times U1 gauge groups and standard model? That's the same kind of question. Like, could it be the initial knowledge, initial pieces of data which our universe is built upon? It just so happened there's just 3 numbers here and some generations of quarks. He wasn't satisfied with it, right? And now he's saying 4 degrees of freedom is already enough. I don't know.
But I would say that in the case of a scientific atheist, what we're trying to do is to come up with a complete set of the rules of chess, as it were, for the physical universe from minimal inputs. And those minimal inputs should have so little structure that they are demotivating to everybody who studies partial differential equations or group representations.
But just to be clear, Eric, like Sean,
Actually, I don't understand why he's saying that that's only theory which does. I mean, in some sense, you could say in string theory, space-time is also emergent, right? Because string theory contains gravity, right? The vacuum expectation value of these string fields gives rise to some geometry, right? So you could say, in some sense, geometry is also emergent there. Of course, nobody was able to build like a string theory in a background independent way yet, but maybe it's just technicality and will be done in the future.
I think I've got a point of where you both come to the same place here. You don't actually know, do you? What was there before nothing?
No, absolutely not.
I would love to. You know what? I would love to.
Way,
Given I've only understood about 1/10 of what either of you has said for the last hour, I would like to end on a point where none of us know the answer to something, because it makes me feel slightly less stupid. Fascinating debate, gentlemen.
Well, it's very sad is that the only things which make you feel less stupid.
I'm glad we ended up with a bit of unanimity at the end there. I appreciate you coming together. I realise you are at loggerheads about a few things. I suspect, as Eric said, Sean, if you spent a couple of days together over a few pints of foaming British ale, or whatever your tipple may be, you probably find you end up best buddies. And I would love to do that interview if you ever do that. So thank you both very much for joining me.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us, and Sean, thanks for doing this. Maybe a cocktail instead of some lager.
Bit bitter, just bitter to be clear. But thank you both very much.
Yeah, quite good interview. Yeah, I don't know whether I should make any concluding remarks. So overall, yeah, I think it's quite interesting. Yeah, I already talked about what I think about geometric unity. But the more important questions which was discussed, whether the field has stagnated and why. And I think Sean hasn't addressed it properly. As I already said, most likely the whole structure of academia is designed in such a way that it disfavors independent thinking as well as deep thinking, and pushes people into this bottleneck of working on the mainstream questions and publish papers as fast as they can to get new positions and then get grants while the topic is still hot, because 2, 3, 5 years later nobody will be interested anymore and people just would move on something else which the trend setters at top considered interesting now. Again, it's not because they're evil, it's just because that's how the central planning system works.